Okay, so this is my call to action speech about gun control, and this is my audio.
Alexa, Shelby, Mother, Garrett, and Daniel.
And my dad's recording, as usual. Great cameraman.
There.
Okay. Every year, guns are used 80 times more to protect a life than to take one. Imagine a world where you go to the movies with your family, and you're watching the previews, laughing with your family, having fun, when all of a sudden you're surrounded by smoke, you hear people screaming, and you hear gunshots. Or something like sending your first grader off to school for the 100th day in a row, only to find out later that a gunman had attacked their school. Living in the U.S., we're privileged with many rights through the Constitution, such as the right to speak freely, the right to peacefully assemble, and the right to freedom of religion. One of the most commonly disputed rights is the right to bear arms, or the Second Amendment. I chose this topic because our rights as U.S. citizens have slowly become more and more restricted over the years, and I don't believe that this should be one of them. First, we're going to talk about the need for the Second Amendment. We're going to talk about the option of concealed carry, and then we'll talk about what the world could possibly look like if the right to bear arms wasn't in place. So first, let's begin with the Second Amendment and why it's in place. This can relate all the way back to the Boston Massacre. This is when the British presence in the colonies was causing a bunch of turmoil. The Boston Massacre was when 5 men were shot and killed in the streets of Boston, and so the colonies actually realized how dangerous a standing army could be in the colonies. So Thomas Jefferson says, "No free man shall be debarred the use of arms within his own land or tenements." Richard Henry Lee says, "To preserve liberty, it is essential that the whole body of the people always possess arms." So during the Revolutionary War, the colonists formed a militia. This was a way for themselves to defend themselves against the tyranny of the British Army. The British Army actually outnumbered the colonists by quite a bit, and they also outgunned them. So the militia was a way for them to fight back against the government. James Madison in the Federalist number 46 paper said that Americans have the right and advantage of being armed, unlike citizens of other countries whose governments are afraid to trust the people with arms. So we as Americans need to realize that we're very privileged to have the Second Amendment in place. It's a way for us to be able to keep the government in check, as well as be able to stand up against them if they are causing tyranny within our country. So gun control in the United States is categorized as any action taken by the federal government or by state or local governments to regulate through legislation the sale, purchase, safety, and use of handguns and other type of firearms by individual citizens. So people think that if you take the guns out of the hands of the citizens, then the world would be a much safer place. However, 7 News says that criminals by definition do not obey laws, so how do more gun laws affect criminals? So essentially you're taking the guns out of the hands of the innocent and placing them in the hands of somebody who could do a lot of harm to our country. 3,800 people were killed by accidental gunshot from 2005 to 2010. So this also just shows that gun safety is something that needs to be taught in America as opposed to gun bans. So now that we've talked about the problem, let's talk about the solution, such as concealed carry. Concealed carry is the allowance of a citizen of the state to carry a gun in public places as long as it's concealed. So to have a concealed carry license, you have to go through an entire class that kind of teaches you the laws of guns and the laws that are in place in different states, as well as gun safety. And a cool rule that goes along with concealed carry is that no felons or criminals or abusers are allowed to have their hands on a concealed carry license, just for public safety. So, So there are some pros and cons against concealed carry. So some of the pros are that citizens feel safer and they feel a sense of self-defense, so they feel safer in public places. And some of the cons are non-carrying citizens feel threatened. They think that the amount of possible guns in public is a threat to public safety. And so a cool statistic that goes along with this is that police officers kill approximately 600 criminals a year, whereas people with a concealed carry license actually kill approximately 1,500. So they're not so much harming the public as they are helping out where police officers can't. Concealed carry could have been useful in places like the Aurora Theater shooting, the Sandy Hook Elementary shooting, or when Congresswoman Gifford had been shot outside of Safeway along with 5 of her colleagues. So now that we've talked about how people can exercise their Second Amendment rights safely, let's look at how the world could look if the Second Amendment wasn't in place. So the Aurora Theater shooting was one gunman who killed 12 people, injured 70 more on top of it, and affected so many families after the tragedy. So we're going to talk about a couple of the testimonies of people that were directly involved in the theater shooting. Jerry Jackson was from Ohio, and she lost her son the night of the theater shooting. She had just gotten off the phone with him, told him that she loved him, and he said, "I'll talk to you later, Mom," and that was the last time that she got to talk to her son. He actually is known as a hero because he jumped on top of his girlfriend and saved her life, whereas his was taken that night. Pierce O'Farrell was shot in the chest as well as the arm the night of the theater shooting. He says he remembers sitting in the third row, looking over towards the exit door and seeing a shadowy figure walk towards him with 2 guns hanging from his sides. He said the only thing that went through his head was that he needed to get to the ground and hopefully that the man wouldn't have recognized him. However, Holmes actually walked up to Farrell and shot him and shattered his entire left arm. And then Tom Sullivan, this is a picture that was on the front of so many newspapers and on all of the newscasts that were happening during this time period. This is actually a picture that showed when he found out that he lost his son in the theater shooting. He was walking around with a poster that said, "Have you seen this boy?" And it was a picture of his son, who was 28 years old. His son was actually killed 2 days before his first wedding anniversary, so it kind of makes you put things into perspective. In an interview with the family, they said that they kind of have learned to take things kind of day by day and not take everything for granted. One of his mom's quotes says that some days we're not moving forward, some days we're just making it through. So imagine if 1, 2, or 3 people had even had their concealed carry license during the theater shooting. They might have been able to stand up against Holmes and made the effect on the families a lot less, and maybe less people could have been hurt in the long run. So now that we've talked about the problem and the solution and the possible outcome of no guns in public, let's take action. So how many people in the audience have their concealed carry license?
We do.
Both my parents.
I do.
And then how many people want to get their concealed license as a safety precaution? They're raising their hands. I promise. So a really great statistic is that Great Britain has actually had a gun ban since 1997, and their number of recorded violent attacks has actually rose by 77%. In Great Britain, there are approximately 2,100 violent crimes per 100,000 people, whereas in the U.S., there are approximately 500 violent crimes per 100,000 people. So the right to bear arms is obviously a necessary constitutional right that we have in this country. It helps us to be able to defend ourselves against criminals as well as if we ever needed to rise up against the government. And it also is a way for us to keep the government in check as well. Without the Second Amendment right, the world would just be a dog-eat-dog world, and with everybody defending themselves. And that's it. And questions?
What age do you have to be to get your concealed weapons?
You have to be 21 to get your concealed carry license.
And then, do you think that the right to bear arms was designed for way back during the Revolutionary War when they were just single-fire weapons, so they couldn't do mass damage?
Well, I think that it was relevant to the time period of when single-barrel weapons were a thing, but now that the government possesses so much stronger firearms, then the people actually have to have those stronger firearms in order to defend themselves against the government that possesses those firearms.
Do all states recognize other states' concealed weapon laws?
No. So if you have a concealed weapon license in Colorado, you can't carry in places like New York or California. But there's an app actually that lets you know if you have a license in a certain state where you can carry your concealed weapon and get away with it essentially in other states. So and show the.
Everybody still clapping? Yay!
So good.
Okay.
That was horrible.